So there's a book called Stamped from the Beginning by Ibram X. Kendi, and there's an argument that states that when there was plantation slavery, chattel slavery, going on in the United States, there were three types of people. One group wanted it to stay the same, one group thought it needs some improvement, something's wrong with it, but it should basically just remain intact. And then the third group said this isn't right, that we shouldn't be doing this to human beings. And then you fast forward to today's day and age with mass imprisonment, mass incarceration. I like to call it SEG, slow entrapment genocide. And there's still three groups of people. There's people that think that the prison system in America is fine, it works how it's supposed to be, it does its job. There's a second group that says there needs to be reform, there needs to be something kind of fixed and tinkered with the system, that it's kind of broken in some way. We need to repair it. And then there's a third group, which I'm involved in, is prison abolition. I think that we shouldn't be caging human beings. We shouldn't be profiting from their labor. We shouldn't be gaining anything from their removal from society. And that it also causes more problems than it fixes. It creates kind of a different human being. If you put a dog in a cage and you just leave it there, and you let it out a week later, do you think that dog is going to love you and be okay? It's going to have something wrong with it. It's been in a cage for a week. It's the same concept. We're all social creatures. We're all living, breathing entities. And so I want to do a spectrum exercise, and I know you guys are all eating. So, and I promise you'll go right back to what you're eating. But if everyone wants to stand up, and I'm going to kind of place you all on this. If you're a prison abolitionist, go to the left side, or my left side of the room. If you are a prison reformist, think the system is broken, needs to be fixed in some way, stay in the middle, or move to the middle. And if you think that the prison system is absolutely fine, there's nothing wrong with it, go to my right. And I want someone to, a few people in each group, explain why they're in that side of the room. And the people in the middle, I want to know what's going on with that. So if anybody wants to explain in the middle first, then we'll go around.
I would just like to, I'm in the middle first because I don't have as much information, I think, as I want to have.
Okay. That's good. We'll get to it.
I'm excited.
Does anybody want to explain why they're where they are?
So I feel like the system is a little fucked up, but at the same time, I do think there needs to be something in place.
Well, you could be on this side because even if there needs to be something, it can't be what we have now, and there's no fixing it. We need to get rid of it.
Why do you say there's no fixing it?
Because it's too fucked up.
So you say start over?
You'll learn more today.
Yes.
We can argue later.
I'm here because the funding we spend on prisons could be used to actually care for people. And I worked with formerly incarcerated students as their teacher, and I do think it's too fucked up, and I agree with that. And I think that if you're going to spend that much money on something, why don't we work on actually helping people instead of just, I don't have a nice word for the second part.
I guess the reason I'm in the middle is because I do want to see rehabilitation replace like actually just punitively imprisoning people as like a punishment. But on the other hand, I just don't know what to do with someone who is like a serious murderer or like a child molester. It's like I can't conceive of being able to just let them continue to roam around society. There's a serious issue that we do.
I think that I'm supposed to be over there, but I can't move because there's too many bodies. But what I was going to say is that I think the prison system further entrenches the systems of oppression that we have in our country, especially this gender binary. And I think, like, similar to houses, when your foundation is fucked up, the whole system is fucked up. And I think that this mass incarceration that we have was founded to replace slavery. And so, you know, the foundation's fucked up, scrap it.
Yeah, and so you can all go back to what you accurate. If you take, I don't know if you can, but there's a possibility of taking Reiko Hilliard's Inside Out college class, and she explains very specifically and in detail with all kinds of data and books about that it did come out of chattel slavery. It was kind of an evolution of the plantation. You just change some things. You don't call it a plantation, you call it a prison. You don't call it a slave, you call it a prisoner or an inmate nowadays. And everything remains the same. You still get the work that capitalism needs to run, and people get messed up, and society overall does get damaged by that. And so, in an argument to what you said, what do we do? And that's the main argument about prison abolition, is what do we do about the extreme cases? Sociopaths, psychopaths, people that are predatory rapists, people that just don't understand that murdering is bad, like that. Those type of people, at the same time, if you put them in a cage, they're just going to murder people in the cage. It's the same thing. You can't just move them to a different location and think that that's going to fix anything either. There needs to be like an in-depth process of trying to explore that person, how that person works, their mind, what they need, why they became that, how they see the world, and maybe possibly doing something with it. A mental institution is terrible also, but some type of hospital that is maybe a bit more monitored, but at the same time, if you put that person in a cage, they're going to become more dangerous, and they will continue killing people. And that doesn't fix anything at the end of the day. It just allows that person free reign in an environment where everybody's suffering. And that's the thing too, is prison, when you're on the other side of it. I had this idea that I was going to the U of O getting a doctorate in clinical psychology at the time of my arrest. This was in September of 2014. I thought that like prisoners deserve what they got, you know, all the stuff that you hear about in the news and how they're portrayed in the media. I believed it because I didn't have any other alternative that was fed to me. And going on the other side, it was a very strange thing. I went from, you know, doctoral studies to county jail in a single cell because I have a martial arts background and they considered me a threat to other staff and prisoners, so I had to be in a single cell in 23-hour lockdown, which is solitary confinement. There's a lot of research on that, but we're not going to get into that, about how damaging that is too. I was there for 3 months awaiting trial. And the weird thing is the people that I could talk with across the hall, we had single cells, there was 12 of them, and you could see the person across from you, and you could hear the people to the left and to the right of you. You couldn't hear down the hall very well, but you could basically talk with them if you yelled loud enough and used body language. And it was strange because the second I got there, they asked me what I needed. Do you need anything? Who are you? Why are you here? And after they heard my story, they started just like sending over food. We have to do this thing called, we have to fish, learn how to fish. And it's like basically taking apart your mattress, making a wire out of it, attaching it to something like a bar of soap that you can get at the officer station, and shooting it across under the door. There's a little like half-inch place that you can shoot it across to the other cell. And they would give me food. They didn't know me. I don't know them. I just met them 30 minutes prior. And they were kinder to me and more human than all of the people that were in my classes at the U of O. And they're strangers. And that was a really weird thing to me. All of these people were considered threats like I was. There were people doing time for murder. Almost all of them were doing time for murder. One dude took a bolt and shoved it through another guy's head. One guy shot someone so many times that he ran out of bullets. A solitary individual. But the weird thing is I considered these people friends. I considered them like genuine, kind human beings. I don't know what was going on in their head at the time, but I know when I met them, they were cool, you know? And they went out of their way to provide stuff for me, and that was the thing that twisted my whole perspective is, if I think these people to be my enemy, to think of them as less than human, think of them as a problem in my society, what's wrong with that dialogue that I've been fed, and where does it come from? And And then taking it a step further is I was found guilty at trial even though there was no evidence that I actually committed the crime. And that's why I took it to trial in the first place, because I'm like, I'm innocent. They'll see that because the system is set up where it's innocent until proven guilty, prove all this stuff in a court of law, but that's not the case, and I learned that the hard way. You're told that from the time, like I remember being told that from the time I was little, and that's why I didn't care that people were in prison. I'm like, you deserve that. They wouldn't have found you guilty. You wouldn't have been in prison otherwise. That's not how it works. It's like 90-some% of people take plea deals anyway, don't even go to trial. I took it to trial only because of pride, and like I can't say I did something I didn't do. I can't go in front of a judge and accept a plea deal and as part of that say, yes, I was at this place, yes, I did commit this crime. Mine was burglary in the first degree with a firearm is what they convicted me. I couldn't go up and say I did that. So I took it all the way to trial and I lost. Because the way the system is set up, no jury in their right mind is going to listen to a DA, a police officer, and a bunch of witnesses say that someone did something, and then be like, oh, he's innocent, that makes sense. No, they're going to err on the side of caution and convict them anyway, regardless of evidence or guilt or any other tangible variable. And that was what happened with me. And so, translating that in terms of how innocent people can be put in prison, it's not that big of, it's not that hard to do. And that was further kind of terrifying and uncomfortable for me is how easy that was. It was a 3-day trial and the jury deliberated for like 14 minutes for someone who's innocent and convicted me. 14 minutes after a 3-day trial. Yeah?
Can you take questions?
Sure.
Yeah, I guess I'm curious about, do you see a line between criminal justice reform and getting rid of the prison system that we have now, or do you see it as the same continuum? Is there a line between those two?
Between reform and abolition?
Between criminal justice reform and abolition. Like,
I think that all of this is encompassed in the prison industrial complex, and that's why I'm overlaying it like this, is because it all kind of goes together at the end, and it all serves its place to put someone in that environment, regardless of guilt. I could be guilty and it's still not right. You know, it doesn't matter. But that's how it's set up. It doesn't matter. Your role is to go into that machine, right? It has nothing to do with who you are at all. It has nothing to do with the crime itself. Otherwise, there would be a lot of different factors, like would they, would I need mental help? Like, why did I commit that crime? It doesn't matter. They don't bring any of that up because they don't care. That's not the point. Do I have addiction issues? They'll sometimes bring it up as a defense, but at the end of the day, it doesn't matter. You're serving a role and you have to go into that. And that's what I'm trying to kind of explain is none of that matters when you go through this process. The jury was told I'm a doctoral candidate at the University of Oregon in clinical psychology. It doesn't matter who you are. I'm white. The majority of people are black that go into this system. It certainly doesn't matter for them either. They're further, they have a bigger uphill battle than I did. And that's another problem. And it's weird in Oregon because Oregon has such a low African American or black population in general, but the prison system is still, has so many, compared to the population in society and the population in prison, there's still way more blacks than there should be, still more people in general than there should be in prison. And that's a strange thing because the prisons in Oregon are dominantly white. And you do all the research and all the data and you hear there should be more black people here. Is in my head, I was like, where are they? But then you look at the demographics of Oregon, and Lita Indorisha does a beautiful explanation of why there's so few people that are of color in Oregon in general, and that basically explained that for me. But it's just a very strange dynamic that it doesn't matter who the human being is at the end of the day. You could be a privileged white person that you know I look like, and it is irrelevant. And so when I was convicted, I went to prison in Columbia River Correctional Institution. It's the only prison in Portland. It's a minimum security for men. And I I went to OSP for a little bit, Oregon State Penitentiary, which is a medium. It's the only maximum. There's a death row in that one. It's the only death row we have, even though we don't use it. But I went there for a little bit because I developed pneumonia and I had to go to their infirmary and come back. But I started to see that the point is punishment. The point isn't rehabilitation. The point isn't to reform anything. It doesn't matter your opinion. It doesn't matter what you were struggling with at the time. It doesn't matter if you were innocent or not. It has nothing to do with anything. You have to do what they tell you to do, or you will suffer more than you already are. Being separated from your family, your loved ones, your friends, not being able to interact with what's deemed the opposite sex. Even if you identify not in the spectrum, like if I had a lot of friends that were gay, that were homosexual, and we can't even touch each other. We can't even hug each other. You can't have a healthy anything in there. You can't be friends because you'll get in trouble. Like if they see you getting too close, they'll purposefully move you to a different unit, which is like a group of 80 people. It's a dorm basically. So if you get a best friend that you're always hanging out with, they see that because everything is monitored, and they will disrupt it. They will remove you, one of you. And that's the weird thing is, and let alone all that, you don't interact with, if you're attracted to women, people that identify as women, they don't hardly allow you to interact with them either. And so it disrupts a normal interaction with the opposite sex or anything, any other human being. It disrupts that relationship, that common humanity, because there isn't any. They take it away on purpose. And when you see that, then you're like, what is my real role in this prison? And at the end of the day, the only thing I could figure out is I make them money because I do a job for less than Chinese slave labor wages. Like I do a job for, the maximum pay is like $1 something, $1.50 or so a day. And so that's about, like the maximum, the highest paid job at Columbia River makes, it was $77.90 a month. That is $77.90 a month. And that is, and we have to pay for things like commissary, which are normal prices. They're not, there's no algorithm that says we have to pay this much because we make this much money. We still have to pay the same amount as people on the outside, and sometimes more. Like a little, I think it's like 16 ounces of peanut butter was like $3, where you could get, I don't know, like 20 ounces or something for the same price. Because it's a monopoly and they can't. There's no reason for them to not, because you will spend your money on that stuff if you don't want to eat prison food, and nobody wants to eat prison food. The first job I had was in the kitchen, and there were a lot of fish that says not fit for human consumption, and the majority of the meat we served was expired by around a decade. And the cereal, for example, we had like generic cornflakes, and they expired in like 2004. This was in 2015 at the time. So nobody wants that. So if you have family, if you have friends, if you make a little bit in your job, and a little bit, like I said, it's like $7.90. You save up for things like peanut butter. You save up for things like generic Ritz that you can eat, so you don't have to eat that food. And so that's the thing about reform versus abolition is, if anyone thinks that fixes anything, I can tell you firsthand, it really doesn't. Like, that doesn't do anything for anybody. Like, is that going to make me realize, even if I was guilty, that I did something wrong? No, it's going to make me question, like, why am I being treated this way still if I want to change my life? If I want to be a better person, you're not giving me an opportunity or a means to do so, so what am I doing here? Why am I here? And that just makes you question the system, and it gives you a victim's mentality, and that doesn't help anybody either. And that's why I disagree with the whole rhetoric of crime and punishment, because if you, like, let's say I stole something from somebody, I beat up some dude and I stole everything out of his wallet. He is now labeled in society as a victim. I am labeled in society as a robber, a thief, criminal. But that victim label still does damage to that person because they look at the world like I have been harmed. Now I'm scared, now I'm paranoid. Like if they go to that same area of town, that can be a very triggering, traumatic experience. That doesn't get solved just because this person is removed. Every single time that person goes to that area of town, they get there's something going on because you were harmed, right? And you just never see that person again. There's 3 different dialogues that I really like about what we could do in this country as alternatives. 85% of all crimes occur with having something to do with alcohol or drugs or a combination of the two. So if there was more services about, therapy and mediation and kind of setting that person up where they were sober and having them talk to their victim, that would serve a better purpose because now they both see each other at least. They at least are able to have a conversation and maybe get somewhere. Of course, that would be up to the victim. I'm not saying if someone was raped, they should confront their rapist. I have different opinions about that include violence, but it's just a different thing. It would make them human. And of course it would be their option, but at the same time, even if they didn't choose that, to have that dialogue, to have that discussion with the person that harmed them, there's stuff that we can do for that person. Like, why did you need to do drugs? Why did you feel like you had to be drunk? Why did you feel like you had to overpower somebody? Why did you feel like you have the right to take anything from anybody? That needs to happen from the source. That's not going to be solved by just removing them. They're still going to have that mentality. Same thing with like child molesters, like you mentioned. That attraction is a disorder. There's something wrong with the brain. That's not going to be fixed by just separating them. You have to fix that, right? There has to be some type of process going on with that. Yeah.
It sounds like drugs and alcohol play a big part in your demise or whatnot. Do you mind sharing what substance you struggled with at the time?
No, I'm straight edge. I've never drank or smoked in my life.
Okay.
It's just like 85% of all the people I did time with were there because of like alcohol and drugs.
Okay.
I think I mentioned that when you were outside the room.
Okay.
But yeah, it's a huge. I'm a very rare case in prison that I didn't do any drugs.
Okay.
But yeah, and that's the thing is, I think that's called restorative justice, where they're both in the same room. They have the option of that, and you actually get somewhere with somebody. And it's very powerful when it happens with murders. It's a very strange thing because you can't bring that person back. There's nothing you can do. There's nothing either party can do to bring that person that was murdered back. So what can we do to grow together as social creatures, as human beings? And then that's where that type of thing is very transformative. And there's another model. It's like a tribal model in Africa, where if someone does something in a village, like let's say steals some bread from another family, what they do is they put that person, what we would call a crime, that criminal, in the center of the village, and every single person that lives there says how they've been impacted. Like, you stole bread from my friend and he was hungry. You scared my girl because she thinks she's going to get her stuff stolen. And every single person goes around and says how they've personally been impacted. I'm saddened because you're my son. I taught you better, stuff like that. No human being is going to hear an entire village say something like that and be like, oh, it doesn't matter, I was hungry. They're going to question why they felt the need to do that and figure out other ways in the future of not doing it. But that's another thing is in America we say, you're wrong for stealing bread, instead of why are you hungry? Why are we not providing food for you as a government, as a country? Why do you have the need to steal something if you're that hungry? That shouldn't happen. And that's where Norway comes in. I'm Norwegian, so I'm always going to represent my country. And what they do is like the opposite. It's America says, you have committed a crime, there's something wrong with you, we're going to punish you. Norway says, we're very sorry this happened, how can we fix this in the future? We're going to place you in this kind of faux community for a while until we know that you're okay, and we're going to work with you about what we can do as a government to prevent this from happening ever again. They have maximum sentences in Norway of 21 years, even for multiple murders, because human beings in 2 decades are completely different people. If you think you're the same person you were 20 years ago, there's something. You're not. Like, this is not how it works. And all of that is a good thing to me. You know, the maximum sentence in America is death. Why is that ever a solution? Who gives us the authority to do that? We don't have the right to take another person's life, even if they took one. That's not their right either. Doesn't make it equal, doesn't make it okay. It's not going to fix things. And Norway's prison system in general, they have golf courses, they have swimming pools. Your family can visit for days at a time. They have a full kitchen with sharp knives, and nobody gets hurt. Because that's not what they're there for. That's not how their mind works. That's not how humans work. We just constantly try to hurt people. We don't do that. Even if the media says there are people that do that, you know how rare psychopaths that go out of their way to harm people are? Like I went for clinical psychology. They're like 0.001% of the population of all humanity that has ever lived. It's incredibly rare. You're not going to encounter a psychopath. You can go your whole life without encountering a psychopath. And a lot of people do. So if we're worried about those people, well, cool, that makes sense. I don't want to be murdered, right? But that's probably not going to happen. And that's where the media comes in to keep this system alive and say that you need to be scared of going in the inner city. They use key terms now instead of being racist. No thug is caught robbing another liquor store or stuff like that, where, okay, but why did they need to steal something? That's what they don't talk about. Why are we not providing for people in that area of a city or a town? Why is it so hard to obtain a job in a racist system if you're a dark-skinned person? Because that's how our country is. And that needs to change. It has nothing to do with the people. It certainly has nothing to do with the human beings. It has to do with the way that our country has been set up and what we've been founded on, which is slavery and genocide. That still is embedded in our psyche. Like, that's where we come from. We need to talk about that. We need to talk about punishing people that break a law that we arbitrarily made up and a bunch of old white dudes did because they were worried about their property being taken or stolen or damaged. We need to worry about how we can provide for these people. Who cares about property? They're going to die. What they're going to do with their property when they die? Be dead. See what I'm saying? Property has nothing to do with anything. So, research where your laws come from. There's a law in Oregon called theft of services, which can be arbitrary as you plug in a cell phone at a bank because you have a low battery, and you're taking their electricity, and that's a felony. See how stupid that sounds? That's ridiculous. But you can be charged with that if a cop is arbitrary enough to want to do it. He's bored. He can. That's the thing. Like a burglary in Oregon, when I was convicted of, if you cross the threshold of a door that is an occupied dwelling, that is considered a burglary. You don't have to take anything. You have to harm anybody. If you cross the threshold of a door that is occupied with the intent, and they have to just determine what you were thinking of stealing something, that's a burglary. So they can just say you had the intent, and you can go over to your friend's house, and that's a burglary. It's an occupied dwelling, you cross the threshold of the door. See how that doesn't make sense? It's protect property. It has nothing to do with human beings. Now, if somebody was harmed and they called it a burglary, I would see that might make sense. Someone was harmed, you can't be doing something like that. It has nothing to do with it. It has to do with the threshold of the door. That's where laws come. You know, like, why? So, I guess what I'd like to do is kind of open it up to more of a debate, similar to what you kind of started to do a little bit in the beginning. But yeah, it's like, what are alternatives to our prison system, and or what are arguments that you guys think that makes sense for the system to remain the same.
Arguments against the system use financial means to strengthen our education and social programs from a young age so that there's more of a foundation for everyone. There's more equity generally. People have the supports that they need. They don't need to turn to other things. Psychological health programs that you could be starting in schools, so that way we're not waiting until someone has a mental health crisis to see a mental health professional, and they instead get support throughout their lifetime, things like that.
Is there an argument why any of that would work?
I agree.
Or-
I agree, and I think that the focus should be putting more money towards preventative measures, because there's, like you said, there's a common reason why. Like, you steal bread probably because you're hungry, probably because you don't have the money for it. So I don't think putting them in prison solves anything. But you mentioned this earlier, sort of like the extreme cases, which is what hangs me up about completely abolishing prisons, is how do you put somebody in like a facility, like you were saying, that's focused on rehabilitation without it just reverting back to the state prison system?
Well, I would say that stop being punitive, and if someone messes up one time, the prison systems that I've experienced are if anybody messes up once, they take everything away for everybody, and it gets further and further more dehumanizing because of solitary individuals that have really nothing to do with anything. So one person will break a rule and it'll get worse for everybody. Another person will break a similar rule and it'll continually get worse. So if like let's say you have a hospital on ground similar to a Norwegian prison where there's a fence, but you can come and go outside the building. The only time a guard or somebody comes in is if they're doing an assessment or you ask them to come in. It's like a faux community. It's not like a cage where it's just a different type of feeling, I guess. There's no bars, there's no rules to say you can't do this and this and this. You're not required to do anything other than talk to someone that goes in for that assessment, right? Stuff like that where you can still, I guess, isolate them from the community so they don't continuously harm for those rare cases. But at the same time, you don't need to imprison them. You don't need to put them in a cage. You don't need to treat them as less than human, you know?
Yeah, I guess I'm just skeptical of our society's ability to actually do that. I think it should be done. I'm just very cynical about it.
Yeah, this is like 100 years in the future probably.
Yeah.
But I still want to do it.
So I believe the prison system was set up a while ago, I think before the 70s, to be more of a rehabilitation type system. Is that correct or no?
I mean,
They've already kind of tried going that route.
Well, Nixon and Goldwater did this thing where they kind of translated a lot of terms related to prison so people would be more on board with the rise of mass incarceration. But Bill Clinton in general, in his presidency, did a lot of damage, and he's one of the solitary reasons why our population in prison is so large in America now. We have like 2.5 million people in prison, and he's one of the main reasons for that. There was like 20 prisons built every few days in his presidency or something of that nature. And he also passed a bill that doesn't allow Pell Grants to people in prison. Like, we used to be able to get college degrees or continue our degrees if you were in prison. He took that away. Like, you can't afford it. And if you can't afford it, it's kind of hard to contact a college in general from the inside of a prison. We don't have access to the internet. We can't just call a number. So he made it basically impossible to continue your education also. So that's another thing, is taking away the possibility of improvement, of rehabilitation, even in this current system. That says more about like why. Maybe like reform towards abolition is something I'd agree with. Critical resistance agrees with the same thing. My group, Liberation Literacy, is similar. It's where we agree with prison reform as long as the end goal is prison abolition. Like, you can give education back to prisoners, that'd be cool. Like, so maybe we can get some degrees. Like, if you send someone to prison and they come out to your community, it's 80-something or 90-something% of people that do go to prison will end up back in the community. Do you want those people to be educated or you know, not educated and a bit more violent because they've been in prison? Everybody wants them to be educated. So stuff like that. But that kind of snowball effect did start in the 70s, and they claimed it was for, you know, to fix things and rehabilitate and, you know, clean up the streets, war on drugs, war on crime, war on poverty, all that stuff that came about. The end goal was the gears of capitalism need to continue running.
You refer to the prisons in Norway, and I was trying to put that together with prison abolition. Is a prison in Norway what you would consider a prison, or like?
No, that's a weird thing. Is because it's not. I mean, it's a faux community. It's a fake community. I think that some people do call it a prison because that's the only thing that they have as what we would call a prison. But I don't feel it. It doesn't give off the same energy. It doesn't sound the same. It doesn't serve the same purpose. So I don't necessarily think it is a prison in the way that we think of it. I think it's a prison to them because it works for their country. But in the way that we think of a prison, it's really not. It's not even close. But at the end of the day, if that would be abolition, I still think there's some improvement with their system that can be done. Like, you don't need to put someone in a fake community for 21 years. You know, that doesn't make sense. Stuff like that.
I was wondering if you could talk about like what you see the path to like reform or like reform to abolition is like, I just think about the like general, we're law students, we have an interest in this to some certain extent. I think there's like a broad swath of people that are just like, prison reform, prison. That's never affects me. I don't know anything that's been, and they just don't care about it. Coupled with like politicians just being like, it's probably an unpopular idea to come out and be like, hey, I wanna help out prisoners. I don't see, right, whether that's right or wrong. So I just was wondering, like, what do you think the practical path to some sort of change like is?
I think that as a politician or as someone who makes laws or change laws or a lawyer in general has input in this decision is that you can subliminally say things the same way that they did with trigger words, say where you're going to save people money by reforming the system, right? But at the end of the day, all the stuff you're doing is towards removing them. You don't need them anymore. Diverting funds that, like the Oregon Department of Corrections, I just heard Colette Peters speak at PSU a couple weeks ago, and she gets like $15 billion a year to fund the like 13, 14 prisons that are in Oregon. All of them are state prisons. There's one federal prison in Sheridan. That's it. Like we have about 14 state prisons. He has $15 billion for that. You don't need that much money. Like we don't see anything like the way the Columbia River is set up. You would save money on healthcare, for example, for the prisoners if you served us better or healthier food. You see what I'm saying? Where you can sell it like that. You can say, this is at the end of the day, we are saving money for you, but what the prisoners see is they get better food. You see what I'm saying? You can sell it to the public and just do the. Bernie Sanders is doing something similar. Like he's saying we need reform. This stuff needs to change, and hopefully he'll go a step further and just sell that. Like, yeah, the system's broken, we need to fix it, and then like start fixing it, like removing it. But that's the only thing you can do, because that is a common opinion of that we need prisons. You can't just remove them. So start slow, sell it to the public how it makes sense. It will save money. Like it will make sense over time, and our communities will be safer also. Like we're not putting someone in to make them more dangerous in a cage and just bring them back out. That causes problems. So in the long term, you can sell that too. You can word it in a certain way to say that over time this will pay for itself. This will fix societal problems that we see.
I mean, that makes me think of an initiative I've heard about in Texas called I think they're Right on Crime, and it's they're fiscal conservatives who have a coalition who are working on prison reform in Texas, and coming from like a conservative side that the system doesn't work and it's not a cost-effective solution to crime.
monetary adjustment and fix that they would agree with. That's why there are groups of conservative Republicans for prison reform, because it costs them money, right? On the other side, Democratic Socialists, we shouldn't be treating human beings this way, right? It doesn't fix anything.
So I think certain elements of criminal justice reform are fairly easy to sell. So like you're talking about the taxpayer monies, thousands of dollars get spent on housing inmates, every day. Each inmate, costs thousands of dollars a day. That's fairly easy to sell. Same with the notion that nobody should be spending 10 years in jail for drug crimes, largely victimless crimes. I think those are relatively easy, but the fact remains that the vast majority, the majority of prisoners in both state and federal prisons are violent offenders, and so I think that one thing that's absolutely necessary, no matter which side you fall on, reform or abolition, is a fundamental paradigm shift in how we perceive violent offenders and how we treat them. I'm lost at how we start shifting, our cultural perception of people who've committed violent crimes and how we not see them as deviants or people who can't be rehabilitated.
I think that starts, and the majority isn't violent crimes. The majority of any prison is non-violent drug crimes, but there's still a large percentage, like me included, I would be considered a violent criminal. It starts with education. I think that if you explain, in a very simplistic term, you could explain this to a 3-year-old, if you're happy, if you're content, if you're okay, if you're fed, if you have a place to stay, you're not going to feel the need to harm or take or do anything violent to anybody because you're okay. No happy person that's laughing goes and starts beating up somebody. That's not how it works. That's the opposite of how our brains are wired. And so if this is explained over time, that we can provide for these people so they don't feel the need to harm or take or hit or rape or murder, then maybe over time that can also be solved because they're happy, they're content, they don't need to. Why would they harm somebody? So I think that at the end of the day, and that's where liberation literacy, our goal that me and a man named Garrett Felber did when we started it was we want to weaponize education. We want to make it a threat so we can dismantle this type of stuff. And that's the only thing that you can't just tell someone this is how it is. You have to explain, you have to educate, and why, and how that will work. This is just a beginning to that step, hopefully.
You stated that the majority of prisoners are there for non-violent drug crimes. Where do you get that information?
I believe it's on the Sentencing Project. It's a website. It's true of like every state that and in some states it's a bit more even, but at the end of the day, I think it's still like the closest is 58% of non-violent drug crimes are, federal prisons are a bit different. There are a lot more violent people in federal prisons. State prisons, it's always like majority is drug-related crimes or non-violent drug crimes. Federal crimes, federal prisons in general, there is sometimes a bit more than half are there for violent offenses.
To go back to something that you were talking about earlier, kind of like the work of critical resistance and Angela Davis, who kind of spouses using that dialectic approach of reforming and improving the here and now for people's lives while working towards abolition. So that sounds like a really good idea, the best idea in theory is improve things in the here and now while working towards dismantling the system. But if the danger of improving things in the here and now is that we're perpetuating the existence of the prison system, how do you go about that work in a way that works towards a radical abolitionist end goal and not perpetuation of the prison industrial complex?
Well, I think that it always has to be reminded to everyone that's working with that is that there possibly can be a time where we get education back in prisons, They started giving us stuff like tablets towards the end of my time that I served because they want us to be happy there. They want us to stay serving this you know, the gears that they need to run everything. We're free labor almost. They need that, right? So they're going to make us comfortable because that affects their bottom line. It makes sense. People will be okay, and there will be less outcry. There will be less lawsuits if people are provided for in prison. And so that is a problem. Is you make the system so comfortable and for everybody involved that we can just keep this, right? But I think that there's a psychological component that could never be changed, could never be truly resolved in that setting, is that it will still damage the psyche in some way. And so always being reminded of that is, yeah, we're giving you better food, yeah, we're giving you actual health care, yeah, we're giving you programs and services and education, but are you happy? Are you okay? Like, are you fulfilled as a human being? And I don't think that answer could ever be yes in prison.
My only concern with abolition, I'm all for mass reform. I think there's so many different components of the prison system that are awful. But I know people who have gone to jail and prison that have done awful things, that were privileged and had food. They were never hungry. By all means, by all of the fundamental needs, they had all of them. They should have been happy. They were getting mental health treatment even, but then they still go out and commit crimes. So I guess the reason I'm concerned is I just feel like it's hard to say that one thing would help everybody. Does that make sense? Like, say someone has everything, they're happy, they're fed, they're getting mental health treatment, but they still commit a crime. I don't know if it's as easy as saying like, oh, well they're just not happy. Like, how do you make them happy then? If it seems like they have all the fundamentals.
And I think that an argument is in your statement is that if they go out and commit more crime, there was something that wasn't resolved in the first place.
Yeah.
So, I mean, and that's the point of when I went to jail and when I got found guilty and went to prison, is they kind of try to help you. You can meet with like a mental health therapist in prison, like once every 3 weeks for the most extreme cases. They'll give you mental health medication. There's programs that you can do to pass your time. I started one of them. But that doesn't really resolve the underlying problems that a lot of people have because they never, it's not intensive, it's not personal, it's not one-on-one. We meet at the extent, meet for a therapist for an hour every 3 weeks, talk about our life.
I was more so talking about like before they even commit their first crime. I'm not talking about getting help in jail or prison, but more so like, what if, you know, they're being helped, they have all those programs outside of jail and they're educated and privileged by all means of the word, but then they still commit crime anyways. I just think it's hard for some people to identify what they're missing, because it sounds like one of your premises is that like something's missing. You know, there's a component, whether it's mental health, education, something's missing. But what if for some people it's just not that obvious? You know, it's not that obvious. Like they weren't hungry, they weren't.
Well, I had a friend that I did time with named Ryan, and he came from an extremely privileged background. His parents were millionaires. He lived in Lake Oswego, and he had never been arrested his entire life. And in his mind, he was just like, this isn't good enough, so I'm gonna, like, he kind of started doing drugs, but it wasn't enough. He's like, I need a different high, so he started stealing stuff. He started robbing people, and he got that high, right? And then it was fulfilling for him. And so I think that, and he was happy, like he was good, he was provided for, he had everything that he could ever want. And so there is still that component of maybe that might not be good enough. Yeah. And then maybe like the tribal model of Africa comes in, like you sit them down to everybody that they've impacted, like this is what you did to me, this is how you impacted my life. Nobody's gonna keep doing that if they're told by everybody that like this damaged me, this hurt, this scared me, you know?
Yeah, yeah. So more so taking like the community approach afterwards. Okay.
You don't need to lock them up, that's not gonna do anything, in my opinion.
Can I just respond? So I think kind of just to summarize the issues that I'm hearing, it's like with abolition, like there does seem to be like a preventative approach of like where to put resources, and then a question of like, well, what to do when people harm afterwards, which Joshua just spoke to. To response to yours, I'm sorry, what's your name again? Peter. I think that just having like a goal of abolition can kind of like tell you like what reforms are abolitionist and what are not. So I know we have like limited time, but I'm just wondering, Joshua, if you could give some examples of like what's something that's a reform that wouldn't necessarily be abolitionist. Just one that I'm thinking of that comes up a lot often is like overcrowding of prisons, and people are like, oh, reform, let's build more prisons. And that's, not abolitionist. So do you have other things just off the top of your head?
I mean, that's a big thing is they will build more prisons and say, they'll sell it to the people in Salem that do make these decisions by saying it'll relieve overcrowding and we can move people to that prison. But what they don't tell the public and the people that fund this is every new prison they build will be filled to capacity, and then they will be overfilled because it makes them money. So but that's how they sell it. They do that a lot in prison too. They'll give us a program that's new, and they'll put it in this like 2-page newsletter that we get once a month from the library there, and it'll say, hey, this new program is offered in, and like we always have a few guys go to it to see what it's about, because at the end of the day, it sounds amazing, it sounds wonderful, it sounds like there was one for a public library that came in and was giving us free books. But what they did with that is there was a requirement to get the book. You had to admit guilt of your crime. You had to do things that outside of the class, like talk about who you spend your time with. Like it's basically a program to get people in trouble. But they sell it like we're going to give prisoners free books, right? So like, and that sounds cool. That sounds great, even for the people inside, because we don't have access to a lot of stuff. Like, yeah, of course I'll go to a program if I get some free books. But then you have to tell on people, and you have to claim you're something you're not. You have to over and over again say, like, if I'm convicted of a burglary, I'm a burglar. This is what I did. This is why I did it. And it's a conditioned response that over and over you start to identify, like, maybe I am a burglar, maybe I am a criminal, and if I am that, then I need to be the best criminal. I need